Okay, well, I think we can move on then. So thank you, everybody, and good afternoon from South Bend, Indiana. Thank you very much for joining us for our next session. I'm Will Beatty. I'm a graduate student at the University of Notre Dame. And before we begin our next panel, I'd like to introduce Dr. Elizabeth Lastra of Vassar College. Dr. Lastra is the chair of the Digital Humanities and Multimedia Studies Committee, and she's here today to speak about their work. So I'd just like to turn it over. Thank you very much, Dr. Lastra.
Hi, everyone. Well, first, thank you, Will, for the introduction, and also a huge thank you to the Graduate Student Committee for putting on this wonderful event. It's so great to have all these digital projects being shared. And I actually want to point us to a couple of things that very much go along with that. So first, I'm going to put some links in the chat, and then I'll talk about these links. I'm going to share my screen too. All right, so does everybody have these announcements? All right, so I realize it's a lot of text, but I'll talk us through this. So I'm here speaking on behalf of the Digital Humanities and Multimedia Studies Committee, and I want to speak about a couple upcoming events. So first, I want to point us to something like incredibly relevant to what we're doing today, which is a video and workshop led by Dr. Laura Moriale on cataloging digital scholarship with her digital documentation process. And this is incredibly important, incredibly useful, because this allows you to make your digital project findable and citable. So this is something that I want to point out to all of the panelists today, and also anyone in the audience that has a digital project. And this is two parts too. So Dr. Moriale has created a video that goes through this process step by step that you can use. So this is a standalone resource that will continue to live on. And also the committee is sponsoring a workshop where she'll answer questions about the process too. So after watching the video, you can like hands-on work with this too. So if you've started, say, cataloging and you have some questions, this is a great time to ask Dr. Moriale these questions. Also a great time if you're just getting started and you're sort of a little worried, or are there any holdups or anything like that. And this is something I've experienced myself too. Maybe many of us have, that we keep wanting to catalog our digital projects and putting it off. So this is the moment to do it. The other thing, the second thing I want to point your attention to here is a DHMS sponsored coffee at the annual conference. So for anyone attending the annual conference, we would love to invite you to this coffee. So one, it's a great way for us all to get to meet each other in person. So this is for anybody interested in DH, if you're already working with DH, if you're just thinking about it, if you're teaching with anything to do with digital humanities, it would be great if you would come to this coffee. So on the one hand, it's, it's a break in the conference, it's a moment for some refreshments, get a chance to meet each other in person now that we're all gathering in person again. And then also too, we're going to be asking, and this will be a very informal discussion, mostly it's just a way to meet each other, but the theme of this coffee will be, what ways can the DHMS committee help us all as members of the MAA community? What things can the committee do? What needs do we have for digital humanities? So mostly we're getting a chance to meet each other, but also we're going to have a way that you can leave your comments too, so that we can think about, things that MAA what things the community needs and what things we can do. And then the last announcement, and last thing I want to draw your attention to, and this is also something sort of organized by Dr. Laura Moriale, but then led by a lot of different people, is the Digital Medieval Studies Institute. And this is also at the annual conference. So if you're going to the annual conference, we have a few more slots in the Digital Medieval Studies Institute. And so this is the last link that I've given in the chat. So that link gives you more information about the Institute. And there's still several slots in the Using IIIF Images and Tools workshop, which is going to be super useful. It's led by Stanford Rare Books curator Benjamin Albritton. And so something to think about if you're using images in any way, sort of like manuscript images, trying to work with high resolution images. And so there's a few slots for that. And with that link, you can sign up, or also email MAA 2023. So that's all my announcements for now. Thank you. Looking forward to hearing more projects, and hope to see you at some of these events. Thanks, everyone.
Brilliant. Thanks very much, Dr. Lastra. So welcome again to our Next panel, session 2, Digital Humanities as Public Humanities. We're first going to hear from Leah Luking-Frost. Leah is an assistant librarian at the Vatican Film Library at St. Louis University and director of the Metascripta project, a position she took up in August 2022. She holds a Master's of Science in Information from the University of Michigan School of Information and a PhD in English from St. Louis University. Prior to her career in librarianship, she was an instructor of English and Latin. Dr. Frost has also published articles on early modern literature and drama in venues such as Blackwell Literature Compass and English Literary Renaissance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And it's very convenient that we've been talking a little, we heard about cataloging and IIIF, because that is going to come right back in my presentation. I will also let you know that there is slightly less pedagogy in the presentation than the title actually implies, but there is a little bit, there's a little bit, but mostly I'm focusing a lot on the features that we have. So today I'm going to tell you a little bit about Metascripta, an ongoing digitization project at St. Louis University's Vatican Film Library, and the contributions we hope to make to medieval studies as a field. The VFL was established, in 1953 with funding from the Knights of Columbus, and was born out of a desire to both to preserve the manuscript library of the Biblioteca Apostolica Vaticana, or the BAV, and to enable manuscript studies during the aftermath of the Second World War, when the originals were often, unsurprisingly, inaccessible. Throughout the 1950s...
I'm so sorry, Leah, I don't mean to interrupt. Do you want to have the PowerPoint running at this stage?
Yes.
Okay.
Is it? Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. I did not remember to share my screen. Here we go. Are we seeing it now?
It's just loading. Yes, we've got it inside
Awesome.
the Vatican Film Library.
Okay, let me get this back in where it belongs. Okay, the VFL was established in 1950. Yeah, read that part, sorry. Throughout the 1950s, librarians at the BAV created microfilms of approximately half of the Vatican's 80,000 manuscripts, which now comprise the bulk of the VFL's extensive collections. Right now, the vast majority of these films can only be viewed at our headquarters in St. Louis, but the Metascripta project offers a way for scholars to discover and access these materials from anywhere in the world. It will also provide a state-of-the-art platform for scholarly interaction with our collections, and these interactive features, which are now live on metascripta.org, will be the primary focus of my talk today. I'm going to start out by attempting to forestall one of the questions I'm often asked about this project. But Leah, isn't the Vatican digitizing their own collections in high resolution and full color? And yes, I have spent a great deal of time on DigivatLib, the BAV's website for their own digitization project, and their images are indeed very beautiful and colorful. But my answer to this admittedly understandable question is, first of all, to point out that the VFL has a long history of collaboration with the BAV, of which this project is certainly a part, and that librarians from the BAV have expressed their support, as well as their interest in our cataloging apparatus. More practically, though, Metascripta will help you to find manuscripts, and then we let you scribble on them. By which I mean, not only does Metascripta aim to provide discovery metadata for the tens of thousands of manuscripts in our collections, but we are also providing a platform for interactive scholarship, cataloging, and annotation. Metascripta is open access, produces public domain images, and is freely accessible from anywhere in the world. Metascripta will also take steps to address an issue that has long been a problem for both the VFL and the BAV, discoverability. The VFL's collections have never been completely inventoried, and even at the BAV, only about 30% of its entire manuscript collection has been cataloged to modern standards. The print catalogs, if your institution is fortunate enough to have them, do not cover large swaths of the material, and even the online search function at DigivatLib isn't an effective way to find material for which you don't already know the exact shelf mark. A search for manuscripts dated to the 14th century, a very broad category, but a simple one, yields the following results. As you can see, the lack of authority controls makes it very difficult to find the appropriate material. Basically, any way that the cataloger spelled it showed up as its own category instead of one broad category for 14th century. And while some items, such as the famous illuminated Bible of Federico de Montefeltro, are given very elaborate descriptions, other items don't include any metadata, making them invisible to any kind of search. Metascripta aims to solve that problem by providing basic but consistent discovery metadata. Manuscripts can be easily searched by century, country, and/or language, a bare-bones discovery system, but one that will eventually cover all of the microfilmed manuscripts in the VFL's collections, including many that have not been cataloged elsewhere. By making the collections searchable as artifacts rather than as texts, Metascripta offers new avenues to manuscript discovery. The most exciting features of Metascripta, however, are its unique interactive elements. Users of the site can create both descriptive metadata and annotations not only for VFL files, but for anything compatible with the International Image Interoperability Framework, or IIIF. If you're unfamiliar with IIIF beyond its capacity to display images, it's a framework that allows digital artifacts to cross the boundaries of individual repositories by creating universal standards for image description and delivery, allowing users to interact with, share, and incorporate visual and audio-visual objects with embedded metadata. In medieval studies, for instance, it has been used to digitally reassemble manuscripts that have been cut apart by unscrupulous collectors and dealers, and are now scattered across institutions. At Metascripta, IIIF annotations can be created through the Scholar's Workbench feature, while descriptive metadata can be created through the Community Catalog feature. Eventually, those features will be linked so that you can embed your own metadata into your annotated manifest. At the moment, both can be used separately. What you'll see on the site is still a beta version. Both of these elements will also eventually be incorporated into Digital Scriptorium 2.0 once that project is off the ground early next year. We have the same systems architect as they do, which is the wonderful Ben Bacalar. The Community Catalog offers an opportunity to create extensive descriptive metadata for any manuscript included in our collections, and any others that have a IIIF manifest available. The simple metadata you see when you browse the site offers a consistent, standardized way to discover material in the collections. What the Community Catalog allows you to do is to expand on the basics of century, country, and language and produce a detailed catalog entry. One need not be an experienced cataloger to benefit from Community Catalog. The site interface offers suggestions for controlled vocabularies to use for the various attributes of manuscripts. This will produce catalog entries that connect context, carrier, and content metadata, which thoroughly describe the manuscript as, respectively, an object in a repository, a physical object, and a text, using authority controls to connect them to the linked data universe. It will also create code that can be added to one's IIIF manifest so that it will display in the info bar, although at the moment this has to be done manually. That's coming in the future. The results can be used not only in one's scholarship, but in one's teaching. Even if students do not plan to become manuscript librarians, the process of cataloging and describing a manuscript offers a way to put learners in direct dialogue with the material text, albeit in mediated form. Metascripta employs a number of student catalogers. At the moment, we have an undergraduate student and a graduate student who work together to identify and produce discovery metadata for each manuscript in the collection. Engaging in the often difficult process of identifying and describing manuscripts, even with the assistance of published resources, can give students the skill and confidence to engage directly with primary sources or their digital surrogates. It improves their ability to read a variety of historic scripts, recognize a variety of temporal and geographic characteristics of manuscripts, and use high-level foreign language skills. Primary source literacy is a vital skill across the humanities, and Metascripta's cataloging infrastructure offers students a way to develop that skill set. The other interactive feature that Metascripta provides is Scholar's Workbench, which allows users of the site to create and publish IIIF manifests based on our images or any other IIIF compatible images. Scholar's Workbench uses the Mirador IIIF viewer to allow viewers to create and share their own image annotations for any IIIF manifest, whether hosted at Metascripta or elsewhere. Like the Community Catalog, Scholar's Workbench will be accessible from the About page for every item, as well as the home page. You can register for a free account in order to create your own collections and manifests. Using the Mirador interface, you can then annotate any IIIF manifest you choose and even compile multiple manifests into a collection, like this one. By toggling the annotations icon, which is the one in the, it's the speech bubble icon. If you click that, you can create multiple types of annotations, making them visually distinct by choosing from among the multiple shapes and colors. Again, kind of hard to see, but you can pick shapes, you can change the color here. So you can use one color for textual transcripts, one for commentary, one for image description, and so forth. Annotations can include reference images, links, and tags. You can even view multiple manifests side by side, such as this example, which shows a Metascripta manifest and its counterpart in DigivatLib. Annotations can also be viewed in aggregate and edited. One could imagine an instructor assigning students to create their own annotations, creating blank annotations for students to fill in with their own commentary, or using the annotated manifests in class presentations. The results can be viewed in any IIIF reader. And what you can do is you can share it. And if you go into this, if you use one of these, it will be, you'll be able to see it. And either saved privately or eventually shared with the public. As I hope I've shown, Metascripta will have much to offer the fields of medieval studies and manuscript studies beyond its images and even its metadata. As a free, openly accessible website, it will grant access and discovery to our collections from anywhere in the world. Beyond that, Metascripta will also provide a platform for scholarship and instruction, allowing scholars and students to interact directly with manuscripts and with other scholars. It will be an example of the ways in which digitization can allow humanities scholars to access, produce, and distribute freely accessible documents for research and instruction.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much, Leah, for sharing that with us. Yeah, it sounds like a fantastic and really powerful tool for teaching and research.
I will drop the link in the, I had it in my PowerPoint, but I will drop the link in the chat as well, because these two features, we did get them live in time to do this talk. So
brilliant. That'd be great. Thank you. So as with our previous session, we're going to hold the Q&A right at the end. So we'll have all three presentations first. And so we're going to move on now to our second presenter, which is Kirsty Francis. Kirsty is a PhD candidate at UCLA, where she works on medieval French, English, Latin, and Norse literary cultures. Her current project, Queer Magic, Sodomy, Sin, and the Supernatural, 1150 to 1650, argues that magic was a heuristic for medieval writers, theologians, and philosophers to grapple with unnatural bodies and sex acts. She has published articles on alchemy and erotic epistemology, sadomasochism in Troilus and Cressida, race in 16th century England, and medievalism in video games. And today's talk comes from a joint editing project headed by Laura Moriale that was recently published in Digital Medievalist.
Hi all, thank you so much for being here today. Thank you, Will, for introducing me. I also want to give a shout out to Maggie, Maria, Will, and Reed for organizing. This has been a really great showcase so far. I really enjoyed learning from all of you, and for the audience for taking the time to join us today. I really appreciate it. So as Will mentioned, this came out of an article, or this project became an article. I'm putting that in the chat. The focus of the talk today is not really going to be the article, though. It's going to be about the process of collaborative digital editing and how this process could translate into the classroom. So this is a project I participated in during fall 2020 in the heart of COVID. In the last session, James mentioned how working on transcribing manuscripts and doing that kind of work can be really lonely. And that's a great point. And this was a project that made that process a lot more collaborative and energizing. I know that after this talk, my next panelist is going to also talk about crowdsourcing. So this is a great, I think, conversation to have between Leah's work, mine, and the following talk. All right, so just get started with what this project was. All right, so this was a 3-day challenge organized and led by Dr. Laura Moriale, as you probably have heard from Elizabeth Loster's talk and the shout out that Leah gave. And now Dr. Moriale is an independent scholar and medievalist and digital humanist who really puts together a lot of exciting initiatives in DH. And so one of these was a 3-day transcription and editing challenge that would be published in a journal like Digital Medievalist. This took place during the 13th annual virtual Schoenberg Symposium on Manuscript Studies in the Digital Age. And the goal of the project was to transcribe, edit, and generate a critical apparatus for a scholarly micro-edition of Le Pèlerinage des Demoiselles Sapiens, sorry about my horrible French, a previously unedited French language text that survives in 9 folia of the UPenn MS Codex 660. If you are interested, you can also check out the website for the project. I will also be able to drop that in the chat. Sorry, I know we all just moved from the PowerPoint. There we go. And this kind of gives a more overview of the project and who is involved, etc. Alrighty. So the big key to this project's success was collaboration. As you can see from this map, we had 31 contributors from all across the globe, and they ranged from graduate students and postdocs to independent scholars and emeritus faculty. And this range of experience was really critical for pulling off this challenge. When you think about teaching this in the classroom, you can think about how you as the instructor can scaffold the experience, because it was great to have Dr. Moriale kind of give us some guidelines and then divide it among the rest of the group. The 31 of us divided ourselves into team transcription, team revision, and team submission, and we were each led by a team captain. So I worked on team submission. I also worked on kind of the larger administration of the project and the ultimate writing of the final article. And we communicated in a couple of different ways. It was not like live as in we were transcribing on Zoom or something like that. Rather, we were communicating via a private Slack that we created for the event. Google Docs, we were kind of working collaboratively in Google Docs, and then our transcription software. And that takes me to the right tool for the job. What we ended up using for this project, and I promise this is not an ad for From the Page, it was just a really exciting tool that I think would be a great classroom asset. So we used From the Page, which is a web-based transcription software. It works for any language and reading format, including non-Western scripts, reading right to left and left to right. It supports crowdsourcing projects. It's really a crowdsourcing transcription hub. And you're able to produce rough transcription, edited text, translation, and MS images side by side, which I think is a really neat feature. Even if you're just like creating a transcription for yourself that is going to become a printed edition, it's a really helpful tool to kind of keep all of your resources side by side. And it works with a lot of other digital library systems. So shout out to Leah for giving a great explanation of IIIF. So it totally works with that system, with other systems like Omeka and Internet Archive, and kind of like Wikipedia, although you have to be, you have to register yourself to transcribe, it preserves the edit history. So you can see who's done what and kind of revert to a previous version if needed. But the one drawback is that it's not free. It is for a single project. If you wanted to do this for like a classroom setting, it would be $100 for a month's worth of access. That's not cheap, but as a grad student, I was able to find a way to get funding for this. And my hope is that folks who are not graduate students and have more permanent positions or more access to funding could also do that. So I'm just going to take a minute to show you what that looks like. Here we go. All right. So here you can see this side by side. We have, sorry, I know it's a small screen. Let me make it a little bit bigger. There we go. So you can see on the one hand, we're looking at the manuscript image. And this is a great tool if you are teaching at an institution that doesn't have a digital or doesn't have like a manuscript repository, because none of us were actually at Penn to work on this manuscript. It had already been digitized. And that was really helpful because we could all just access it from wherever we were in the world. And if you're doing this in a classroom project, it would work with a text ranging from, okay, yes, if you were a French scholar or teaching a French class, maybe in a graduate seminar, you could work on a French manuscript like this. But if you're teaching an introduction to, DH class or something, it would be useful to do something like looking at a printed, like the first folio of Shakespeare that's available online, and see about how you can recreate that process and what you learn in the process of turning that into a digitized version in your own regard. In fact, that's part of what inspired this project and the excitement for me of the teaching aspects of it. I don't know if any of you all did this, but I embarrassed myself in my first graduate seminar when my professor in a class on editing asked, how do you choose what edition of a text to use? And I said, whatever is free and easily available. And that was not the right answer. And I got a good lesson about, all of the work that goes into editing and all of the kind of background knowledge and all of the background processes. And that's what I think from the page specifically helps make clear to students. So, like I said, you can see this. We didn't end up translating, but if you were someone who wanted to work in multiple languages, you could then do a translation based on the transcription, and you can move it side by side as well. And if you wanted to see what the transcription part looks like, all right, so it may, if you never worked with HTML, this may look very overwhelming, but as I will get to in a little bit, it really wasn't, because we had some great guidelines provided by the leader of the project. This is definitely a entry-level DH project. Okay, my coding expertise comes from like Tumblr and MySpace. I am not Jashong, who provided like amazing tech skills. But it is possible for folks to work on this from even an entry-level undergraduate experience. And this is also a really great thing about like teaching for undergrads. It provides students with a lot of different backgrounds. So for instance, at UCLA, all students have to take some writing focused classes and some classes in the humanities, even if they are, a comp sci major. And I get a lot of students who are trying to make connections between, the required class they have to take in English and the work that they actually are wanting to do for their major. And this is a really great opportunity for students who have that digital interest or have that background in computing or in programming, even just as a side hobby, to experiment with that in a really low stakes way. And like I said, this process really gets easier with helpful guidelines from the leader. Let's go back to the slides. All right, so the process, this is how we did this, but I think for a classroom, it would make a lot more sense to maybe break this down over multiple classroom days, because this was like an 11 a.m. on Wednesday to midnight on Friday, experience. And that's not sustainable for a pedagogical experiment, unless you want to make a lot of people really sad. Please don't do that. All right, so day one, we team transcription, which is about 10 folks led by a team leader. They transcribed all the folios from the digitized manuscripts at the Schoenberg Library online from the page, and then they drafted a transcription statement in Google Docs. I will show you that transcription statement in a second. On day two, team revision, another group of 10, reviewed and edited all of these folios, and then they finalized the transcription statement. So by day three, when I came on board as kind of team submission, we already had transcribed folia, and we already had a final transcription statement, which was really helpful, because then team submission wrote the introduction to the text, which involved, doing research comparisons to similar works, and also describing our edition methodology, which was tied to the transcription statement, but also included our ethics statement and the kind of general idea behind the project. We generated a transcription log identifying who accomplished what, and then we collated these documents as well as the final transcription and transcription statement into a manuscript that conformed with the requirements of the journal Digital Medievalist, because that's where we ended up submitting this for publication. The final version ended up getting submitted via email to our organizer, Dr. Moriali, and she did the final submission process. But as you can see, if you clicked on the article link, we were all listed as authors of that article. And that, if you end up going the publishing route, that was a tricky thing to get done. Even with a journal like Digital Medievalist that is very, open to digital projects, in academia, we have this, very hierarchized idea that, especially in the humanities, that isn't really open to multiple authors. And it was a real problem to figure out how can we list everyone who worked on this project equitably in a way that also, makes the journal happy. And so we went for an alphabetical order, but then we also, as you can see, if you look at the article, break down that transcription log. Alrighty, so I know I'm out of time. I'm just gonna get very close to done. So just a couple of things that I think are really important if you decide to teach this, or what this project did. Let's see, 1 second. You need to provide guidelines to your students. Here is our transcription statement that was based in event guidelines that are provided on that website. And this transcription statement provided for students who have no coding expertise, gave them a way to copy and paste that information and build it in their transcription. So if you're someone who's like, I don't know how to make something italic, or I don't know how to highlight that this letter is red, right? You could do the basic transcription and then go back in when you're ready for the revision process and say, all right, I have these, this kind of cheat sheet. How do I know what to plug in? And that can teach you, these digital skills as well as transcription editing skills. So yes, I just want to highlight that if you teach this project, you need to provide that, because that is something that students will not have on their own. So what are the payoffs of this? And what would be the bonus of teaching this type of process, using from the page, using a kind of multiple step transcription where the class comes together to create a virtual edition? First, it increases equity and accessibility in our field. As I'm sure COVID reminded all of us, most of our images or most of our databases in medieval studies are not digital yet. And providing a working transcription really provides, really highlights a text and makes it more accessible to a wider range of people. Provides your students with insights into the publishing process, so that way they won't embarrass themselves by saying, I don't know what an edition matters. It empowers participants to create their own resources and to show them that there isn't a huge distance between, let's say, the Riverside Chaucer or something and their own experience, if they have the power to make that translation from manuscript to text themselves. It's a great project for classes on history of the book, manuscript culture and materiality, even basic medieval literature courses, or an introduction to DH methods, theory, and practice. So I'm going to stop there. I appreciate Will for letting me go a little over time. I apologize for that. I have my email here because if anyone is interested in seeing a sample assignment sheet for how this could work in a classroom, please feel free to contact me. If you want to talk about, how you could implement part of this for your students, or even just her experiences on, what are learning goals and how did that pay off? I'm happy to talk more about that. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Kirsty. Let's move on to our third and final panelist, Grace Campagna. So Grace recently finished her master's in medieval studies from Fordham University with concentrations in history and digital humanities. Her MA thesis focused on the applications of crowdsourcing and collaborative research in medieval studies, as well as user experience best practices for improving public engagement. She most recently presented this research at the North American Conference on British Studies.
There we go. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much to the organizers who put together this wonderful event. Like a lot of other people today, I'm getting over a cold, so please bear with me and we will see if my voice decides to cooperate. So the DH project that I will be speaking about today has been the focus of my research for the last year and a half, as well as the subject of my master's thesis. It's a really perfect fit for this session, as Dr. Moriali's work was a huge inspiration for the project. So great to talk to you about that, Kirsty. So in the time that we have, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about an overview of the project, the platform that it's built on, and then a bit about what we've achieved so far. So Get to Know Medieval Londoners is an online crowdsourcing project that collects digital transcriptions and structured geographic and biographic data from medieval London's property deeds. So in the 1980s, there was a group of researchers in London who created several thousand little transcriptions and partial translations of medieval property deeds on index cards. So these cards are all handwritten and pretty poor candidates for digitization via OCR. but they do provide a really rare opportunity where there is a large set of medieval material that is accessible to people without any training in Latin or paleography, which also makes them a really wonderful fit for a public-facing crowdsourcing project like this one. So the two main goals of this project are to produce accessible digital versions of this historical source material, and also to invite the general public beyond academia to participate in the research process. So Get to Know Medieval Londoners is built on the Zooniverse platform. This is a very accessible browser-based tool which hosts crowdsourcing project. And this project, like all projects on the Zooniverse platform, relies on volunteers from the general public who have no specialized training in order to process and collect our data. So a lot of people ask me, what's in it for the volunteers? Why participate in this? That essentially boils down to education and an interest in this topic, people getting access to sources that they wouldn't normally have access to, and opportunities to be part of a community and to contribute to research. So this project officially launched on June 28th of this year. This slide shows a few of our metrics since then. So our source material includes over 3,000 property records from London's Hustine Court. These have never previously been digitized before, and we collaborated with the Institute of Historical Research in London to gain access to them. Using these sources, our volunteers have made over 15,000 classifications. We've attracted over 1,200 volunteers to the project so far. Some of these people had, a prior interest in medieval history, and there are a lot of people who are engaging with medieval history for the first time through this project. And in addition to their classifications, those volunteers have also started to create a lot of dialogue about the project on our discussion boards. We've had over 1,000 discussion board posts in just over 5 months. So the key takeaway that I want to convey to you all today is that the success of Get to Know Medieval Londoners demonstrates that a crowdsourcing project using a free browser-based platform like Zooniverse offers a really low-cost way for digital humanities scholars to study a large body of source material in a systematic way while meaningfully engaging with the public audience at the same time. So let's zoom out for a second, just look at some of the general characteristics of crowdsourcing in a humanities context. So crowdsourcing projects in DH present a really unique opportunity for both public engagement and data collection in the same project. These initiatives usually rely on a very large and non-specialized labor force for data collection once your initial project is set up. And the tasks that your volunteers are completing are related to information management. So for example, creating digital transcriptions of written documents, creating captions for images, answering questions about a document, filling out metadata, et cetera, et cetera. And crowdsourcing projects usually place a very strong emphasis on open access. So not just to your source material, but also to your data collection process and to any resulting publications that come out of your research. So this is where Zooniverse comes in. So Zooniverse is, as I've said, a crowdsourcing platform. It primarily catered to the scientific fields in its earlier years, but has since expanded to include kind of the full spectrum of academic disciplines. It's browser-based and it is completely free for all parties during all stages of the project, so both on the project design side and on the user side. It basically allows anyone to design and run a crowdsourcing project. And this approach really significantly lowers the skills barriers for individuals and small teams to create these kind of projects. It requires very minimal coding experience, and the platform provides extensive documentation and guidance on the entire project development process to help you through. Zooniverse projects also, a huge advantage is you can take advantage of the platform's existing volunteer base. I think there are around 2 million registered volunteers right now. So these are people that are already familiar with this technology and they're actively looking for projects to dedicate their time to. All right, so how do you build a project? That process happens through the pretty aptly named Project Builder interface. This interface allows you to input all of the specifications for your project, and then Zooniverse will build all of your user-facing web pages for you. So there's no coding required, no web hosting, no servers that you have to deal with. So through this Project Builder interface, you build your workflows, which is how data is collected. So each workflow has its own set of tasks. These can include text entry, object identification, multiple choice questions. Zooniverse even has a drawing feature and is currently testing out a feature to correct OCR data. So Get to Know Medieval Londoners has 3 workflows. They are organized by difficulty in order to kind of help manage participant expectations about what they're going to be doing. So our first is called Identify Places. And this workflow collects data on London parishes and streets that are mentioned in these records. It's pretty easy because those features are kind of easier to spot once you know what words to look for. Our second workflow is called transcribe, and this produces a complete digital transcription of these index cards, slightly more difficult because of the longer time commitment and because of the occasional Latin phrases that people will run into when they're doing this. And our third and most difficult workflow is called identify people. That's the screenshot that you see here. And this actually collects prosopographical data about the individuals who appear in the records, so including their name, gender, civic status, and a bunch more things. It's the most difficult because it kind of requires a certain level of comprehension for people about what's actually going on in a medieval record and takes a little bit longer to complete. So all of the data that is collected in those workflows will be uploaded to the Medieval Londoners database. So Medieval Londoners is a separate but related project. I've been a contributing editor there for several years, and their database is open access and prosopographical in nature. So it contains detailed life records for inhabitants of London between about 1100 and 1520. So uploading all of our project data to this database, not only facilitates greater access to it because it's on a free online platform, but it also provides a place for us to credit our volunteers for their work on particular records. So what you see on the screen is a profile record for one individual in this database, which is the eventual end product for all of the data collected through Zooniverse. So that little catalog or credit field is in the bottom right-hand corner highlighted in red. So participants in our crowdsourcing project will not only see how their research becomes part of a larger research database, but also be able to see their names actually attached to that work. And it is through this process that Get to Know Medieval Londoners really invites the public to participate in that research process and lowers the barriers for entry. So a very important element of that invitation is making sure that participants have a very positive experience when they're engaging with a project, especially if they have no experience doing medieval history before. This really helps you attract and retain the volunteers that are very essential for your success in the project. So curating this positive experience means using inclusive and accessible language on your project website. It means ensuring easy navigation, and most importantly, anticipating the errors that users are going to encounter when they're working with your sources. So to achieve that goal, we have extensive resources on the project site that really guide volunteers through the workflows. So we have a tutorial for each individual workflow, task-specific help text on each question, and a general field guide that provides in-depth information about a lot of aspects of the sources and then also links to further reading. So here is a closer look at one of the resources that's available in the field guide. It is a list of abbreviations that appear very frequently in the source cards. So volunteers are actually invited to contribute to these resources and enrich them as their own knowledge of the subject material grows. So they can suggest additions to lists like this through our discussion boards or through a shared Google Doc that anyone could make comments on. So the final products of these really communally produced resources will be publicly available so that anyone conducting research on these sources can use them. So we're essentially altogether forming the user's manual for this type of property record. And in addition to our co-produced resources, every Zooniverse project has built-in and customizable discussion boards. And these really enable the growth of community around your project by providing a centralized place for dialogue. Volunteers use these boards to talk amongst themselves and with the project team. They can ask questions, share discoveries, and just generally help make connections. You can tag people, you can respond to things, you can link images and everything all in these discussion boards. And the people that have been participating in your project for a while will start to build up an expertise on the subject material, and then they will in turn bring in new users. They'll be able to help other users and just kind of enrich the entire community surrounding your project. So it's less of a one-way dialogue between you and other people and just a larger dialogue between everyone that's participating. All right. So as we have seen, Zooniverse projects are a really powerful tool for processing information and reaching an audience that they're relatively simple to design and can be run by a very small team. Get to Know Medieval Londoners is still an ongoing project. The geographic workflow is completed, but the others are still actively collecting classifications. Once those are done, we're going to move into the data processing phase, which will produce at least 10,000 new records for the Medieval Londoners database and make all of our document transcriptions publicly available. The project is also continuing to expand its reach. In January, it's going to be a featured project in the Who Do You Think You Are magazine's Transcription Tuesday event. which will bring in, we think, several thousand more UK volunteers, especially people who are interested in genealogy. So I encourage you all to take a look at the project. I'm going to put the link in the chat. Please get in contact if you have any further questions or comments, and I can't wait to hear your feedback. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Grace. And thank you to all three of our speakers. I think these are three great examples of how digital humanities can really help to make scholarship more accessible, and it can help to cross those barriers between academics and the wider public. We've got about 15 minutes now for some questions. So if you have anything you'd like to ask our panelists, then please feel free to put the question down in the Q&A. Any of the panelists here, if you have questions for each other, just raise your hand or do the little emote gestury thingy. And thanks, Grace, for sharing the Zooniverse link. Well, while we're waiting for a couple of questions to come in, I actually had one for Leah. You spoke about this need to create kind of more of a systematic metadata so that it was easier for people to find the text. I was just curious about how you went about selecting what you did go for to include in the metadata, and how you kind of balanced specificity and generality, I suppose. What you ignore, what we saw it, for example, with the dates, right, where you have this huge range of dates, and I can imagine that in some cases that can be really beneficial and also a hindrance sometimes to sort of make it more general.
Well, I will say first of all that I came into this project in August, and I am and taking it over, I'm very much standing on the shoulders of giants, because the originator of the project was my predecessor, Deborah Cashin, who, if you've done anything with Digital Scriptorium or the Broken Books Project, she's been a big name in the field. And so when this project was her baby, and she retired, and I've come in and I've sort of taken it over. So I have come in with some of the decisions pre-made for me, and essentially but I can tell you what Deborah's line of thinking was, and I'm sticking to that by and large, which is that first of all, her interest, her sort of governing principle in doing metadata is that we are not cataloging manuscripts so much as we're cataloging microfilms. And so we're looking at the individual manuscripts on each roll as more as artifacts than as texts. So we don't have, so that was what was behind the decision not to put together all kinds of textual metadata, like what is this text exactly and who wrote it and so on and so forth. Although we do find that information a great deal of the time in the cataloging process. A lot of the conversations that I have with the student workers, for instance, are what actually is this, beyond where is it from? But the idea is that with the wide time ranges, even dated manuscripts, they are cataloged by century, and that is because of controlled vocabularies. You can use the, I don't even remember what the name of the thing is. There's Getty AAT is what we use for that, and so you can use that authority to make them searchable that way, in a way that you couldn't necessarily do if you were putting specific individual dates, like I showed you with the Vatican example. And then country and language are both things that, people, as scholars, we all kind of silo ourselves a little bit. People might be doing English lit or French lit or German lit or whatever. And so one of the most common ways to search is just looking for texts from a particular place or in a particular language. And she also made the decision to stick with modern country boundaries rather than earlier ones. And again, it's all to sort of fit into the existing controlled vocabularies, and thus be able to connect it to the linked open data universe. So it's a lot of it is behind, simplicity and thinking about the way in which scholars sort of categorize themselves. The goal is, to enhance discoverability. And so the decisions were made on the basis of, well, what might people want to look for specifically?
Right.
And how can we balance that with the sheer number of things we have in the collections and the need to catalog all those manuscripts?
Right, absolutely.
If that answers your question, which
it absolutely does. Thank you very much for that. Yeah. We have a question for Grace from an anonymous attendee. So Grace, thank you very much for your presentation. Do you worry about the longevity of Zooniverse?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So Zooniverse as a platform has been around since like 2007-ish. It's been kind of continually growing since then. It's still growing now. So I don't see it declining anytime soon. But they're also like, the University of Oxford has projects on Zooniverse, NASA has projects on Zooniverse. So there are some really big fish basically who are invested in keeping this platform active and going. So I think any decline we would have a lot of fair warning for. And also this project itself has a lot of outputs that are not connected to the platform itself. So we have all of our structured data, all of our transcriptions, and all of those communally produced resources. Those are going to be eventually hosted in different places. So if the platform itself ended up being out of date, there are still different parts of the project that are preserved elsewhere.
Thank you. I had a question actually for both Kirsty and Grace as you're working on these collaborative projects. Do you gather feedback from the participants, the volunteers? And if so, I'm just curious about what kinds of thing you've heard from them about what they've gained from these projects. Perhaps if we can go to Kirsty first.
Sure. Yes. So that was a big kind of question. It was kind of like, all right, folks who are doing this, we're all interested in transcribing, of course. I mean, we've signed up to do this project. We're all interested in like manuscript culture and DH in some way. But I think what we all discovered as we were communicating afterwards, like our Slack stayed live for quite a while afterwards, our communication platform. If you're not familiar with Slack, it's like a messaging app. And so, that was a really great way. I made connections with folks that I hadn't met before. And like now we have like, if I have questions on some French translations, I reach out to them, I'm like, can you give me some feedback on your thoughts? It's been a really great way to build community with folks that you haven't seen before. Like I ran into someone at a conference now that we're back in person that I had never known before, or that I had met on this project, but we had never met in person. And so I know that's very anecdotal, but when we've asked for feedback from participants, my sense, of course, I wasn't the lead organizer, so I'm sure Dr. Morial, I would have had a better sense, but my sense from what I've heard from folks is that it was a really energizing project as opposed to draining. Like, yes, it was kind of a marathon, and it was exhausting in that way, but it also was it really combated that loneliness that James was talking about in the first session. It really was a way to build community and also to find that like there are folks, some people didn't know there were other folks in their same city who were working on this project. And then when we did like the participant map and looked at that together, they were like, oh, wow, I didn't realize that you were also in New York City. Like we should meet up. We should think about other ways we can collaborate. So I think that's a really major strength of the project, especially if you're able to collaborate in a kind of a multinational way, or at least a multi-city way. Yeah. Grace?
Yeah, no, I will echo everything that you just said about building community. I think these projects are a really fantastic way to do that, across borders, across time zones, all of that. We've had so many volunteers from the project who are, very active in the discussion boards, talking about how much the project has like helped them like connect with their own heritage. Like if they're Londoners, they're like, oh, like I walk past these streets every day. And now I'm seeing it like, 800 years ago, what it looked like then. So it's a very cool way for people to connect with their own city. We've had people who have actually found relatives in the records. They're like, I've done my genealogy back however many years, and this is actually the surname of someone who I'm related to. And just people who have been like, oh, I've always been interested in medieval history, but I never was able to get an official degree in it. So this is a really great way for me to like interact with this kind of material without having to like invest so much time and energy into like getting the official degree. So it's just a really fantastic way to build community. everyone talks to each other, everyone helps each other out. We have some really fantastic people.
Brilliant. Thank you.
I just had a quick question, I guess, for Grace. I was really excited to see that you guys are going to work with, like, who do you think you are? And I guess I'm just wondering, like, in my mind, that would scale this project up like really quickly, because that is such a show with a huge following, right? Like, what are you guys thinking about, like, in terms of project management? I just wonder, how are you guys thinking about that process in terms of, like, if you get what if you double, the number of participants? Because, like, I think it would be really exciting. It seems like there's a lot of genealogical possibilities, and I could see a lot of people who watch Who Do You Think You Are being really interested to also participate in this. So yeah, I'm just wondering from like a practical standpoint, what are you guys thinking about in that way?
Yeah, sure. So the Zooniverse platform itself makes project management really easy. So it handles like all of the web hosting stuff for you. So the main issue when it comes to like the volume of people is keeping up with the discussion boards. So when we first launched in our week, I was spending 4 to 5 hours a day on the boards, just answering people's questions, like looking up references for them and things like that. It got to be pretty exhausting. So we're kind of expecting a similar volume of people for this event. And the cool thing is you can, on the discussion boards, assign moderators, basically. So people that have been involved with the project for a long time, they can, even if they weren't involved initially, they are now moderators. So they can kind of help deal with that influx of people. That's the kind of like super user that I was talking a little bit about at the end of the presentation. So it's kind of reaching out to the community that you've created to kind of help with all of that project management stuff. So yeah.
Cool, thank you so much.
I had another question actually for Grace, if you don't mind. You spoke about the training the volunteers need and making sure that it's accessible, that it's easy to understand, and so on. I was curious if what kind of work went on behind the scenes to get to that stage? What kind of research was done to say, okay, these are the scaffolds we need to put in place for the volunteers, in case anybody here is, thinking about doing their own kind of collaborative project, what they might need to do?
Yeah, that's a great question. Thank you. So a lot of back end research on like what these records look like. What is the typical format that a user is going to encounter? So you can we have a resource on there that's like an anatomy of a property deed, so they can see like the basic breakdown of these things. Compiling glossaries, abbreviation lists, lists of forenames that people are going to encounter, things like that. We also did a bunch of initial testing on the site to see what we were missing basically for users. So in order to become like an official project that Zooniverse promotes for you, you have to go through an internal review, which is where their team members will look at your project, basically see how it will work on the platform, see what's missing for users. And then you go through a beta test, which is where it's sent out to a bunch of experienced Zooniverse users, and they will provide you like direct feedback, like this is what worked, this is what didn't work. So it's a lot of trial and error to try to figure out like the best way to present these kind of often very complex historical ideas to a general audience.
There's a lot of collaboration even behind the scenes before you get to that public collaborative stage.
Yeah, exactly. I'm sure Kirsty would say the same thing about the need for like a lot of collaboration behind the scenes to make a project like this work.
If anybody has any final questions they want to, I'm just seeing one. I'm sorry. Oh, Kirsty, yes.
Yeah, great question, because again, like I could do italic HTML, that was it, but like I had no idea how to do any of the coding type of thing from the page. And so first of all, I'm happy to share a cheat sheet, of course, but if you like hadn't come to this talk and you just encountered the website from the page, they do have a great guide that explains it all to you. They have like here's how you use this process, here's how you like if you're trying to mark that there's bold, or that there's a rubricated initial, or that you're trying to annotate marginalia, right? Like they have a really clear system for doing that. So I do think it is extremely user friendly. And that's part of why I do think it's a good teaching tool, is because even with students who, you know, have not had much experience working with like a digital platform at all, if they encountered it for the first time, it is like a very basic process. I know I mentioned kind of Wikipedia earlier. It kind of has a similar, I would say, entry to use level for that. So where like you might want to give, you know, watch a YouTube video from the page that they provide before you get started. But I would say it's a low barrier to entry.
Thank you. That was in response to the question in the Q&A, right, about, yeah, from the page cheat sheets.
Exactly.
Brilliant. Well, I think we're at time. So thank you so much again to all three of our panelists for sharing your work with us. It's fantastic to hear what's going on in digital humanities. And yes, we'll give everybody a round of applause. Those with cameras on can clap for everybody. Thank you very much. We are now going into another 10-minute break before our next panel. So please feel free to get some refreshments, and we'll see you again in 10 minutes. Thank you.